everyone. Welcome to our lecture about plants and viruses. And I am wearing my shirt from Peon, Chalidath Restaurant. Let's start with the kingdom of plants, which are multicellular, photosynthetic, and eukaryotic. There are 4 taxonomic groups: the bryophytes, pterophytes and lycophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms. We will learn more about these and how they exhibit these 4 categories of characteristics. They all have dependent embryos. However, only the last 3 have vascular tissue. Lycophytes and pterophytes do not have seeds. The remaining 2 do have seeds. For gymnosperms, those seeds are found in cones. And angiosperms, the seeds are found in flowers. All 4 of these groups have dependent embryos in which the embryo develops in cells attached to the mother. Here's an example of the pterophytes. They have spores. However, the angiosperms have their embryos in seeds. This is a pistache or peanut. And here we can see the embryo. There's a tiny little plant growing inside the peanut. So next time you have a peanut, split it in half and look for that baby plant. Vascular plants have conductive tissue to transport water and nutrients over the long distance that it takes to get from the roots to the top leaves. Xylem is the tissue that transports water and minerals up from the roots. Phloem is the tissue that transports organic nutrients down from the leaves. So one way that I remember the word xylem is in English. Water starts with a W, xylem starts with an X, so I associate those 2 together. And phloem starts with the F sound of food. So phloem is transporting food down from the leaves. The cells are rigid and the plants have roots. And here is where we come back to cohesion and adherence, which are those properties of water that allow it to stick to itself and to other things. This allows the transport of the food and the water up and down the plant. The 2 categories of plants with seeds are gymnospheres and angiospheres. The gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms are the pine trees, the conifers. They have microscopic female gametophytes in these structures that we call cones. The male pollen is in a different type of cone. And these are wind pollinated. The wind shakes the pollen out of the male cone, and the pollen will land in the female cone and fertilize the female gametophyte. Angiosperms are more specialized. The female gametophytes are inside the plant structure itself. And the male gametophytes, which are the pollen, can get to the female structures either through wind or through animals, some sort of pollination. And here are examples of how angiosperms are pollinated. We have insects that get the pollen on them. So all these little yellow particles are pollen. It gets on an animal such as a bee or even the head of a bat, and it is transported to the female structures while the animal is getting nectar. Here's an example of a grass. Grasses are wind pollinated. This is the male pollen being blown off of the grass, and it will land on other grass on the female parts. We also have specialized structures called berries and fruit that attract animals, and that causes them to disperse the seeds. Here is a chart to help you sort this out in your mind. You need to know this. All four categories have dependent embryos. However, only the last three have vascular tissue. So if you're able to make a chart for yourself: bryophytes, the pterophytes and lycophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms, and across the top, write the characteristics. It will help you keep everything straight while you are taking an exam. Which groups have seeds? Only the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. And finally, which group has flowers? Only the angiosperms. Let's look at bryophytes more closely. They are non-vascular and they do not have seeds. They don't even have roots or leaves. They are small plants that need to live in humid environments, and that's because the sperm swims through the environment to get to the egg. In a dry environment, the plant would dry out and not reproduce. So we will see these in thick forests that have a lot of humidity. There are 3 phyla, or embranchement: the hepatophytes, anthocerophytes, and the mucinae. So the English word liverwort, hornwort, and mosses. Mosses you might be most familiar with. You can see those on campus, along the paths, on stones, on sidewalks, wherever it is shady and moist. Now we'll discuss plants that have vascular tissue, but they do not have seeds. Do you remember what vascular tissue means? Okay. Many species of lycophytes are epiphytic tropical plants that grow on trees. Epiphytic means it's not a parasite, but it's using another organism as a substrate. And there are many of these in the tropics. We also have ferns, the pterophytes, that can be taller and live in slightly drier environments than the bryophytes because the ferns have vascular tissue. So here's the English word I'm saying. Fern is fougere, and I have seen these on campus. Where do you see these growing? We will continue with another group of vascular plants, the gymnosperms. They have seeds, but they do not have flowers. Gymnosperm means naked seed, meaning that the seed is not found within an ovary. Seeds are found within modified leaves in a structure called a cone. Pollen is transported by wind to the ovary in that cone. Here are some examples in English: pine, fir, spelled this way, fir, and sequoia. Here is a picture of a sequoia. Do you see the person down here? That shows how tall the sequoia is. And sequoias are some of the longest living species. They're estimated to be 1,800 to 2,700 years old. So that means before Christ was born, these sequoias, which live in California and western US, they were growing, they were born before Christ. Angiosperms are also vascular plants. However, they have flowers, and as we said, the seeds, the ovaries, are located within the plant in a structure called a flower. Flowers attract pollinators. And here we have, what is this bird? A wanga, I guess. It's a hummingbird in English that's pollinating. The fruits are how the seeds are dispersed. The fruit or the seed can be dispersed by wind, by animals. Animals will eat the seed and either drop it or excrete it. Some seeds have these attachments that help them stick to the animal for dispersion. Here's an ant that's carrying a seed. And we've got a palm tree, a coconut maybe, that is dispersed by water. Now that we are starting to look at specific plants and animals, I wanted to review some ecological terms that you might hear me say during class. This is how we can group organisms that are native or not native to a region. Indigenous or native is a species that occurs naturally in a given area without human assistance. So there are palm trees in Haiti that were here before the Europeans arrived. They are indigenous. Within the group indigenous, we have a smaller group called endemic. These are species that are found only in one country or region, and they are found nowhere else in the world. So an endemic species in Haiti is found only in Haiti, and we'll say only on the island. so it could include the Dominican Republic, such as palm chats. The bird palm chat, esclave, is found nowhere else in the world except this island. Here's an example of a palm tree found only on this island. Exotic, though, are species that were introduced either deliberately or by accident to a place. They were introduced by human activity. So we have rats on the island of Hispaniola. Rats are not naturally found here. They were brought over in ships by Europeans. Some introduced species do not cause problems. We call them non-invasive. Here is an example of a tree. The jacaranda bleu is not native, but it also doesn't cause problems. Invasive species, however, do cause problems. They are nuisances or pests, such as the rat. The rat is considered an invasive species because it causes so many problems and is difficult to control. Here's a plant. We have this. It's in Haiti. We also have this in the United States. In English, I say Japanese honeysuckle. We call it honeysuckle because the plants, the flowers have a little sweet drop of nectar that come out of them. It's like honey. So remember, we have indigenous and exotic. Within indigenous, we have endemic. Within exotic, we have invasive and non-invasive. Take some time, pause this video, and I want you to, in your notebook, write the answers to these questions and to discuss them. You will be expected to know this for exams. So this all should be a review from our last day of class in March. In March, I added a section about viruses. Viruses are not considered living organisms. So they're not in any of the domains we have talked about. This is extra material because a very important and deadly virus outbreak started when I was at UCNH this year. So I wanted to talk about viruses since we have coronavirus going on. Viruses are not living. They are merely genes packaged in a protein coat. Some have membranes to help them infect their host better. Remember, they are not alive. They do not have metabolism. They cannot reproduce. They are much, much smaller than bacteria. Here is a picture of the bacteria E. coli. So the big thing is E. coli. These little things are the viruses. It doesn't say what type of virus, but viruses don't just attack people. They attack bacteria. They attack plants. They attack animals. Viruses don't have metabolic enzymes. And they don't have equipment for making proteins. They can't reproduce on their own. They can only reproduce in a host cell. Also, they usually infect only certain tissues in the host. For example, the cold virus infects only the upper respiratory tract. HIV infects only immune cells. So, AIDS is the disease we get from the HIV virus. Later in the semester, we will learn of how DNA and cells reproduce. So this is a preview of that while we talk about how viruses reproduce. The virus enters the cell and becomes uncoated. It removes its covering. It releases its DNA and capsid proteins into the cell. The host cell then replicates the DNA of the virus. So the virus cannot reproduce by itself. It needs to trick the cell into making the DNA and RNA for it. So then the host enzymes, when I say host, I mean the cell that the virus has infected. The host enzymes replicate the viral genome. What I mean by genome is the DNA, or ADN. Here it is, ADN. The viral genomes and the capsid proteins reassemble to make more viruses. So here we have one single virus coming into a cell. It tricks the cell into making more DNA for the virus. And it tricks the cell into making more protein that it needs to reassemble itself. It reassembles, and then many more viruses come out. How do viruses kill us? There are many mechanisms. The virus's protein envelope might be toxic, or sometimes the virus can cause our own cells to release toxins that destroy the cells. The virus can kill tissue, our own tissue, that way. Sometimes the tissue can regenerate, and then it repairs and we recover from the viral infection. But if it attacks tissue such as nerve tissue cannot regenerate. So the poliovirus, which attacks nerve tissue, is very dangerous because people cannot recover from it, and it can make people paralyzed. Our fevers and our aches are from our immune system defending us. Medical researchers can make vaccines that protect us from the virus. A vaccine is a harmless derivative of the virus that causes the immune system to mount a defense against the virus. However, medicine cannot cure most infections, most viral infections once they begin. And antibiotics do not work against viruses. Remember, viruses are not alive. Antibiotics are medicines for things that are alive. So our best defense is to get a vaccine. Scientists are working on the vaccine for coronavirus and think maybe next year there will be one, but then there's going to be the problem of how do we get it to everyone. Here is a timeline of the coronavirus that I presented in March. And so much has happened since then. December 1st, 2019, it was first reported in China. It came to the US in January. In February, there were over 20,000 cases in China, which now sounds very, very small. By February 11th, there were only 1,000 deaths. Little did we know what was going to happen. This shows the timeline of it spreading. In March, there were over 100,000 cases. March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, which means that it's an illness that is occurring throughout the world. Pan means around the world. March 19th, a week or two before classes ended, there were 227,000 cases and 9,000 deaths. By April 3rd, over 1 million cases and 56,000 deaths. Here is updated information about the coronavirus from September 30th, 2020. And you can get online if you want to see updated information. These are the cumulative number of deaths in Europe, which is in brown. It's this top line, so the number of deaths from day 0, the first day that the virus was detected. This is day 200. These are the numbers of deaths, so you can see it. This is 200,000 on this line. So top is Europe, the bottom in green is the United States. And here are some numbers. You can pause and look at these more carefully if you'd like. In the entire world, there are 34 million cases. There have been over 1 million deaths. And on September 30th, there were 6,000 deaths. And we can break it down by country. Here is the United States. Over 7 million cases, 211,000 deaths, and on that day we had 955 deaths. Haiti is down here. Haiti's doing pretty well. Almost 9,000 cases. It lists 229 deaths. Do you think that's true, or are there more? And you can see some other countries, Honduras, Hong Kong, etc. You can pause and discuss this if you would like. How is coronavirus transmitted. It doesn't linger in the air like the measles virus does. However, it is spread through respiratory droplets produced by a sneeze or a cough. So wearing a mask is you protecting other people from your sneezing and coughing, because you might not know if you are positive for the virus. Still, there is no vaccine, though many researchers are working on that. The best protection is to avoid exposure. These are the symptoms. 2 to 14 days after infection, you will notice symptoms if you're going to be symptomatic. Some people are infected, but they do not show symptoms, but they can still spread the virus to others. Within 2 weeks of infection, you may have a fever, a cough, or shortness of breath. This is dangerous for people who have asthma or other illnesses. Some tips for prevention: wash your hands, which is something we should be doing for any disease. Wash them for at least 20 seconds and often. You can also use a hand sanitizer that's at least 60% alcohol. When you sneeze or cough, cover your mouth. Don't cover it with your hand, but cover it in your elbow. And avoid close contact with sick people. If you're sick, stay home to protect others. You might not be very sick, but an old person could get very sick and die. Frequently disinfect surfaces. You can use 5 tablespoons of bleach in a gallon of water. And here's a website for more information. And this website has been updated since I gave this lecture in March. You may have heard of the term flatten the curve, in which health workers were trying to get people to be careful so that not a lot of people got sick at the beginning of the pandemic, so that the hospitals wouldn't be overwhelmed with people, because there aren't enough doctors and nurses and beds and supplies if everyone gets sick at once, like in this first scenario. So we can say maybe this is January. Now we have September. And maybe by December, there'll be even fewer people who are sick. So we found that in New York City, the curve did not flatten, and lots of people got sick, and the hospitals were overwhelmed, and a lot of people died because there just wasn't enough care for everyone. But it seems like we have been able to flatten the curve. People are being careful. So there's a lot of cases, but the hospitals can handle it. However, in the US, people got tired of being careful, and cases started to rise again. So this is the end of this lecture. We learned about plants and viruses. You will go on to lecture 5 for the next one.